then have a break. That way people can stretch their legs, get a drink, whatever they need, and then roll into DMX2.
Sounds good. Okay, so it's 2 after 5. I just want to remind everyone as you come in and out, please put your ID and your username. I'll be going through kind of periodically at like the 15-minute and the 45-minute mark and updating the prize list. So you have to have your number and you have to be in here kind of the whole time to be eligible for the prizes. So just remember that. And we have a prize for the first session, so we'll do that around 5 minutes to 6, and then once David's done at like 7, we'll have a second prize for that session as well. And I'll make a fresh list for the second part as well. So this is Moving Heads DMX Fixtures with David Spalding, and whenever David's ready, he can take it away.
Like Scott said, my name's David Spalding. I've been doing animated lighting since 2005. I've got 15 years experience, started with LOR, and a few people talked me into switching over to xLights. Really glad I did. Recently, within the last couple of years, started dabbling in more DMX, and look back, it's a lot easier than what people think it is. So what we're going to be covering is terminology, things to consider when selecting DMX moving heads and DMX fixtures, the different types of moving heads and DMX fixtures, the setup of them in the controllers, how to set them up in xLights, which will include the controller connections, your layout, setting up gobos, color wheels, RGB. We're also going to cover setting up labels and states to make there's sequencing has been made a lot easier by the xLights development team. So we're going to be covering the DMX and the state effects. We'll also be covering how to sequence on a group level. Terminology. So a color wheel is electrically operated disc which is fitted to the front of a lantern with several apertures holding different color filters, which can be selected to enable color changes. It can also be selected to run continuously. A gobo is a thin metal plate etched to produce a design pattern which can then be projected by a profile spotlight. Angle within which the lowest intensity in a beam of light from a lantern is not less than 1/10 of the maximum. Pan is going to be your horizontal rotation. Tilt is going to be your vertical rotation. Slew is the speed of movement. We'll get more into slew when we get into xLights. Your optics, it's lenses used to make beams, gobos, etc., appear sharper or softer. Light output is the amount of lux at a specified distance. Lux is the unit of illuminance equal to 1 lumen per square meter. Things to consider. Acronym that was taught to me when I first started looking into DMX was DMX is awesome. So awesome is going to be your allowance, your weather, electricity, surroundings, output, mounting, and effects. You'll want to take each one of these into consideration when you're picking out a DMX fixture. We'll go into each one to kind of explain what they are. So when you're looking at heads, you definitely want to keep this in mind. So allowance will be your lighting budget. What's the dollar amount you can afford for a head, because you don't want to break the bank. It's also If you want to go name brand versus generic, each have their pros and cons. Generics will be cheaper. Sometimes they don't produce what a name brand would produce. Weather. You definitely have to look at weather, especially with us having lighting shows outdoors. So you want to know if it's hot or cold, if it's going to be raining or snowing, if it's going to be windy or calm, wet or dry, if you're going to have hazy areas or no haze. If you don't have haze and you want the beam effects, similar to what you have down here and right here, you may have to introduce haze through either a smoke machine or a DMX hazer or AC hazer, anything to put a vapor into the air so the beams are predominant. Hot and cold, the reason you want to look at that, DMX fixtures are rated for certain temperature ranges. If you live in a cold climate and you buy a DMX fixture that's operating temperatures are 40 and you get down to 30 degrees, you may need to add an enclosure with heat, snow and rain. If you use an outdoor DMX fixture, they're designed more for snow and rain, which would be your IP ratings. Some of them on the market are IP66. I've seen IP67s start getting really expensive if you get up to the ones that can be submerged, which would be IP68. If it's windy or calm, if you're using an outdoor rated fixture, when your show's not running, you'll want to look for DMX fixtures that don't leave the stepper motors engaged. So if you have a big wind gust come up and it causes your head to move, you're not going to break stuff or spin a motor backwards. If it's going to be calm out, there's not much need to have stepper motors that back off, disengaging stepper motors, but it's something to always keep in consideration. If it's wet or dry, like if you go to Seattle, it's constantly raining. So wet or dry, you could use outdoor fixtures like some of the people do in Southern California. They carry them outside every night, plug them in, show's over, they go outside, unplug them, bring them back inside so they don't have to have enclosures. You need to know if it's going to be a wet or dry condition. If you get pulling around your head where it's sitting, you'll want to have a head that is designed to be in a wet environment. So and here's a little video that Tom had sent me to add to my presentation of what heads look like in the rain. So just electricity. So you need to look at how you're going to get power to your heads, and you also need to look at if you want to go with linkable or non-linkable. When you're looking at linkable heads, you need to look at the maximum rated amount of heads you can link together. Less, especially if you're using a Chinese head, always try to go one head less when you're linking. Those cables do get pretty warm when you have them linked together at the maximum amount. You also want to look at your amp draw, make sure that you're not running a thin extension cord to your first head and then linking your powers together. So in this picture, you've got your power in, and then you would have a white cable adapter that plug in on this side. It would run to your next head with that end and then plug in. Most heads don't come with linking cables, but you can buy them separately, or you can make your own. I recommend you buy from the manufacturer. Let them know exactly what head you have and that you want to be able to power link so you get the correct size of wire, instead of just looking and buying one off Amazon that may not be rated for the amount of power consumption for your heads. You need to look at your surroundings. With our light shows, you need to look at the proximity to your neighbors and structures. If you set a head up, you think it looks good there, and the head starts spinning and smashes into it, it can cause damage to a structure depending on how big the head is and how fast that thing's torquing around, or it can damage the equipment. If you put $1,000 into some moving heads and they break because they hit a structure, they didn't have enough clearance, or they were too close to the other heads and they hit each other and cause some damage. You also want to look at your local laws and regulations. So with your local laws out here where I'm at, I'm in the middle of nowhere. I don't have any local restrictions to heads. There are some areas that have ordinances that won't allow you to shoot beams into the sky, so you need to make sure you're checking on your local laws and regulations. Also be aware of where airports are located and flight paths. The FAA is pretty stringent. You can apply to get a permit to run your lights during certain times. We're just barely on the border of a flight path, and we spoke with our airport representative. They went to the FAA and got us permission to run lights into the sky on Thursdays, Fridays, Saturday, and Sunday. Monday through Wednesday, heads have to be powered down, can't be on. How much will you output to, how will you be outputting to your device? Are you going to be using the DMX off a controller? Are you going to use a WS2811 pixel protocol converter? How are you going to get the data to your devices? Are your cables going to be store-bought? Are you going to DIY your cables? What's the device maximum effect outputs? If you're using the larger heads, 250, you need to know how far out those are going to reach. If you're running effects around and you don't know exactly how far those are going to reach and you go across someone's window, they may not be too happy. One thing to also look at is DMX link light or indicator. It's a little light on the DMX device, or it may be a little dot that'll either flash or illuminate once it is receiving a DMX input. That way it's easier for troubleshooting. Your light's not working, you go look at it, you don't have your DMX link light's not on. Easier to figure out what's going on with it. Mounting. You definitely want to look at the weight and dimensions of the headset you're going to be using. You need to look at if you're going to be using open air or if you're going to be enclosed. When you're looking at mounting on your roof, the average roof in the United States is rated at 20 pounds per square foot sustained. So you can walk across your roof, it's fine. That doesn't mean it can hold a 80-pound moving head. It's recommended that you find out what your roof rating is sustained to support. You also want to look at if you want to put it on the ground, what's going to be around it. If it's going to end up, if you're going to be truss mounting, you need to plan ahead, make sure you have everything that your truss is to mount to your truss. So if you look at the pictures down here, This one is mounted on a roof using a truss system. These larger heads do start getting quite a bit of torque when you start flinging them around really fast. So you want to make sure that your equipment is secure. Just setting, drilling in and hope it doesn't come out is not the best option. With enclosures, if you're going to be mounting to a truss, you need to make sure your enclosure has truss mounting. And then inside the enclosure also has to have truss mounting brackets to be able to attach your head to the truss. Effects. You need to look at if you want to use your heads as accent. If you're going to be using RGB, LED, or an arc light. You get several different effects with these RGBs. You can get them with a gobo. They're normally going to be your wash lights. LED just has a single LED bulb. They don't reach out very well without haze. Arc light is going to be like your metal halides or your halogen lights. And you can get several different effects out of them. You also want to look at the effects capability of a device. If you're going to be using shutters, optics, gobos, prisms, frost, strobe, dimmers. There's a whole bunch of new stuff coming out with heads, and this list changes constantly. This is some of the newer stuff that I have seen in the groups, people talking about getting in their heads. So these are two different gobo wheels. When you're looking at a head, usually these wheels are interchangeable. You just need to know what size, who you can buy from. If you buy a Chauvet and there's an American DJ, if your wheels are the same size and same bolt pattern, you can interchange these wheels by taking your head apart and putting a different wheel in if there's a different gobo you would like to add. The different types of heads. So you'll have your wash, your beam, your spot and profile, or your hybrid. We'll go a little bit more into each of these. Here's just a quick example of what they look like side by side. So with your wash will usually have a soft edge. They do not come with precise beam control options. There's no focus to them at all. There's area in the Christmas lighting hobby. I've seen several people using them to put a moving light across their house instead of having to use a floodlight pointing at their house. The beams, they produce a laser-like thin beam of light through the air, typically used in live events for their non-tapered unique beams. With the beam lights, if you are not going to be running haze, 250 is what I would recommend to have the light show up without running a hazer. You can go lower, but the beam's not nearly as crisp. Anything above 250 watt, you'll get the beam effects like you would see on Tom Bet George's house. Spotlights normally has a sharper edge than a wash. It'll come with 1 or 2 gobo wheels and an iris. Most will have an animation wheel. Typically uses include highlighting specific objects, follow spots, or general. And they can also be used as a sky beam light. You get a lot narrower beam. So in this picture down here is IP67 rated lights. So these are waterproof with disengaging stepper motors. Profile. The difference between a spot and a profile is usually based on the manufacturer's naming convention. Generally, the profile is the same qualities and uses as a spot, but will give up the extra gobel wheel in favor for framing shutters. So if you're wanting your beams to have more square and frame off, that's what the profile usually is. So there's a difference between framing shutters and just regular shutters. Regular shutters will allow you to do your dimming on your arc light. Hybrid. It includes a mix of different styles of beams, of beam, wash, and spot profile lights. Designed to be multi-purpose light, it won't be the strongest spot, wash, or beam fixture when compared to fixtures that's their primary function. So if you had a spot next to one, you'll notice a difference. Same with a wash, or same with the beam fixture. If you put it next to one that's designated for that, you will see a huge difference. Okay, setup. So there's multiple ways to control DMX. The way that most people in the hobby are going to be outputting DMX is through their E131 controller. The most common in the hobby I've been seeing people use the Falcon and the Colt boards. With the Falcons, DMX, they have 3 DMX ports. DMX port 1 is designed more for a differential receiver. There is no shielding ground on DMX port 1. So the preferred on a Falcon is DMX2 or DMX3. Controllers, if you're wanting to take WS2811 and convert it back to DMX, the only board I have ever seen on the market that would do that is the Pixel 2 Things. So the way the Pixel 2 Things works, if say your controller's way away from where you want to put your moving heads, and you have some other items that you're going to run and you want to go out to DMX as well, you can do that with these. So you have your data coming in, your pixels, channels 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5. The board itself will eat up 3 pixels worth of data for either your AC or your DC. This is the breakout for the AC board. And then it comes over and you either have a DMX out or you have your data out for your pixels if you want to put more pixels downstream. The only thing to remember is channel 16. So say you have 2 pixels, your board, and then it goes out. Channel 16 is channel 1 on the DMX out. Channel 17 is channel 2 on the DMX out. And so on and so forth up to 512. So the way to work around this, if you're going to be running pixels after the Pixel 2 Things board, find out what the end channel is going to be and then address your DMX. So say you only wanted 1 pixel. So you want your DMX address to start for your fixtures on DMX on channel 19 on your DMX device. Controllers, you need to be able to get cabling from your controllers to your DMX items. So one thing that you can use is a RJ45 to XLR. And going RJ45 to XLR, you want to make sure you are using FX rated cable, which is going to be your DMX rated cable. XLR is also an audio, so you definitely want to make sure that you are using the FX. It's designed for DMX. It is a thinner, the wires inside are thinner, data travels better over smaller wire. You won't run into any issues if you're using FX. Want to look at if you're going to be using waterproof XLR. So these waterproof XLR, the cables look different, but you can take one of these standard XLRs, plug it into the water XLR, it just won't lock in place. They do make cables that go from XLR to waterproof XLR, but you would have to order it in that way, or you can just get a waterproof XLR, cut an end off, and attach an RJ45 yourself. So DIY cables, you want to either use a Cat rated cable or FX. So Cat 5, you can run that in between your heads, use between and buy XLR ends, solder them on yourselves. So if you're going to be making your own RJ45 to XLR, here's a little pin breakout. And this is the B standard. This is not A. It does matter when you're making your own cable. So number 1 will be your data positive, your data negative, and then 7 and 8 are your grounds. So your brown cables, your brown wires on your Cat 5 will be your grounds for the B standard. And this is just a sheathing ground to kill any interference. When you cut open a FX rated cable, it'll either have a braided mesh around it, which will be your ground, or it'll have a single copper chase through it that will be your ground. Plugs, you want to make sure that you're looking at the correct pin ports. So pin 1 is going to be your ground. On the males, when you're looking at the end of it, it'll be on the left. On the females, it'll be on the right. Your primary data links are going to be pin 2, 3. So your data positive is going to be pin 2, and your data negative is going to be pin 3. I'm sorry, pin 2 is going to be your negative, pin 3 is going to be your positive. So setup and xLights. Say we're going to use a Falcon. So we're going to add Ethernet, and we'll just put in 192. You'll select your vendor using a Falcon. And the way I recommend to set these up to make it extremely easy, you'll set up your DMX first. And it's always easiest to have your DMX on universe 1. Universe count, we're only going to do 1 universe for DMX because it cannot span across multiple universes. And 512 for your DMX. So say you had other pixels you're going to connect in off that controller, you would add another controller, and this is where you would set it up as normal. So the Falcon can, F16V3 can do 96 universes, so we're going to do a universe count of 95 because we already used universe 1, and the starting universe would be 2. In the layout, when you go to set up your heads, you'll use your DMX. There's several different heads you can select from. You can do a 3D head, or you can just do the regular moving head. We'll go ahead and just do a 3D moving head. And when I'm setting these up, I try to use the 3D moving head for washes. If you're going to be using the state effect and states, like I like one to see what's going on with your states, is just your regular moving head. So after you get your head set in here, instead of setting every head out you're going to use, only put one, make one head first. So, and let's say we've got a 16 channel head. So you'll go through the line, work from the top down. So you want to set up your pan channel. Let's say this one's in RGB. So we're gonna have channels 1, 2, and 3 be our color channels. So we'll start our pan channel on channel 4. If you're looking at your head and it's not pointing the same direction as it is in xLights, pan orientation is where you can correct that. So say it's actually 90 degrees away, and that'll give you the correct pan orientation. We'll go back to 0. Pan degree of rot. This is how many degrees of rotation. We'll use 540 is fine. Pan slew limit, degrees per second. So this is where you put it in to make the speed of your head move in xLights just like your head is moving. The easiest way to figure out your pan slew degrees, go to sequencer. You want to create a new sequence. Just do animation, click start. So we'll grab a DMX effect. Drop it on there. And this will bring up your DMX effect. So you have all your channels, and it'll support channels 1 through 40. So you can sit there and play with your sliders to see if your light's moving. Notice nothing's happening there. But notice we set up channel 4, so that one is moving the head in xLights. If you get a cheap Chinese head that doesn't tell you what channel assignment does what, you can plug it in, output to your lights if you have it addressed. So if you're not sure what it's doing, you can go over here to your controller connections, tell it that you're going to put it on port 2 for your DMX port, and that it is DMX. So while you're in your sequencers, you can go through and find out what each one of these is going to do, how it's going to make your head respond. Make sure that it's actually rotating. So the easiest way to figure out your rotations per second is if you take your setting. We're going to set this all the way up to 255, which will be the maximum rotations it'll do. So you'll watch your head and time it when it starts. Otherwise, xLights just slams to where it's at. So say I timed my head, figured out that it takes, in 1 second, it goes 280 degrees. So when we go back here to our sequencer, play it back, you'll see the head. You can actually see it spinning in xLights now, like it would on your display. So back to layout, we'll do tilt channel up 5. Tilt orientation is fine. Say this one does 180 degrees, so it doesn't point downwards. It'll just be level playing field back and forth. You want to do the same on this as well. So you want to time it, see how long it takes, how many degrees it'll move in a second. So just for simplicity, we'll do 280. So your red, green, and blue channels, this is where you would be setting up if you have an RGB head. We'll get into what to do if you have gobos here in a minute. So if you have just an RGB head, your red channel, you found out it's on channel 1, your green channel is on channel 2, and your blue channel is on 3. And different on your heads, check every head to make sure it's the same. You may also have an RGB plus white, so you would find out what the white channel is to turn that on. If it's just a standard RGB, you don't find it turning a white on, move a slider, leave it blank. Shutter channel, so going to be a dimmer channel. If your head has a dimmer, it'll be the shutter channel. For simplicity, we'll leave that off of there. Well, I'll put one on here real quick. So let's say that is number 8. So if we go to the sequencer and we have channel 1 on. Get a rotator on here. Drop an on effect on here real quick. Oh. Save it. And I don't know why it's not coming on. So you would set up your RGBs like normal. Oh, I added shutter channel 8. So if you go into your sequencer, go down to your DMX. Notice how it's controlling the beam now. So that's going to be your on and off using your shutters. You can set up your beam length in your display and your shutter threshold. So if your shutters are programmed to open at 10 when you find out that you don't get any light till 10, instead of you change that to a 10, so then you have to have a value of at least 10 before xLights will start showing your beam. The length, you can change how long your beam is going to show up in xLights just by up or down. You can shorten your beams, make them longer, so it'll actually match how it's going to look on your display. Beam width, you can, if you're using spots, floods, you can make them wider, smaller, make them match your beams. I don't use individual start channels. So when you're in your sequencer and you're looking at your DMX effect, see how it's just telling you channel 1, channel 2, channel 3, channel 4. Where we fix this at is in here where it says strand node names. So you'll click your little 3 dots, and then channel 1 was red, channel 2 was green, channel 3 was blue, channel 4 I believe was tilt, 4 is pan, and 5 is tilt. So we'll set 4 is pan, 5 is tilt. Click OK and save. So when you go back to your sequencer, now it has the labels on here, so you don't have to keep going back or memorize what each channel does. Once you label it on the head, it'll hand tilt. The other thing I like to use is states, which you'll have to have the states filled out if you are going to use the states in your to control preset movements or your gobo wheels, your color wheels. You can control all that with states. So if you go into your states, notice you have a drop down. We don't have any states defined yet. So we'll add a state, and we will call this one RGB. Okay. It's single nodes, and we're going to force custom colors. So if I want to set this up so when I use a state effect, I can make it go exactly where I want it to go. You can click on the state and tell it, I want this to be a vertical movement. So say you want your beams to be pointing up and out. You can find exactly where the beam is going to be pointing. Go in here and tell it that we're going to make this one a pan control. If you double click on your color and then click define custom colors. So notice the red, green, and blues are all at 255. So if you have the DMX set on your pan, it's dead on where you want the pan at 150. You change it in all 3. Click OK. I'm going to change this to shorthand in my display when I'm setting these up. So we're going to do vert, and we want to set the tilt. because we want it slightly down. So you'll click on, you'll tell it's going to affect the tilt channel, define a custom color, and say you played with the heads to get it pointed right where you wanted that head to be at, or for this effect we're going to call vert, and it was 100. Click OK, and notice how you have different colors showing up here. That's fine. It doesn't matter what this color is. We're just sending a value, and that's what color that value ends up being in the custom colors. So you would click OK. So if you go back to your sequencer, instead of using DMX and okay, well, I want to defer at, I want the tilt at 100. Instead of having to go through and do this on each one, if you're going to use this hit several times, get back to layout here and get rid of that shutter real quick, just to keep things simple. So you wanted your head to be pointed at 100, and then you figured out your pan orientation. Get over here to the head so you guys can see it better. So instead of having to set everything up here and using the DMX effect, we're just going to delete this guy out. You can go up here to your timing tracks. So you will add a timing track. We want it to be empty. And then we will RGB. So say at 10 seconds, you want it to hit that position. So you put timing mark where you want it to hit, and then where you want it to end, you put another timing mark. So to get it to do what you want for states, if you double click on that timing track and name it vert, because that's the two positions we wanted the head to go to that we had defined in states. So if we label it as vert, click OK, you can take your state effect, which is your AB, and drag it down here and move it one line down. So always, when you're setting up RGBs, there's multiple things they can do. So if you set them up in layers, it'll work the best. So you can drag this state effect out. Notice how it has timing track here. Well, we can tell it, well, we want it to go to follow RGB head. So when you go over here and play your sequence, as soon as it hits the AB, did I label that wrong? Yeah, spelled it with an I. And spelling is key on these. So once it hits the AB,
Do you have to render it?
computer, so it's pretty slow. If you notice, once it hit that area, it went ahead and moved the head for you to that position. So with the RGBs, you can also take color effects. So instead of having to go into the head and program each DMX effect and use the color effects, you can take, like, say you want it to come on at a specific color during that spot as well. Yellow. With the RGBs, if you have your channels programmed, you can use effects in your top layer to control them. The same goes for if you're using the DMX effect. So if you decide you want the DMX effect, because you're going to do movements on it instead, value curves, you want it to dance around, you can use a value curve to control your head and make it move during that time frame. And if you notice it's moving slower, well, the shorter the effect, the quicker it's going to move. Same with your tilt. So you want it dancing all sorts crazy. So you can put in a curve value. So you can play with value curves to find the movements that you want to use and use your DMX effect that way. You can also layer up, which we'll do a gobo real quick. So we'll go in here into layout, and we are going to add a DMX. Head. So if you have a DMX head that's using gobos, gobos are usually set on the color wheels on one channel, and it cycles through the colors. So to set up a gobo in your states, so you know your color wheel is going to be channel 1. So we'll go in here and name this color wheel. And you've got a lot of heads will have 2 gobos, so you can do gobo 1, gobo 2, and it does matter that these match up how you're labeling them with the lights that you're going to be using. So we'll do hand channel is 1 and tilt is 5. And if you're just playing around with them, put a number in here for your slew. Most heads will be roughly 280. I haven't seen any that are moving a lot slower. But if you don't have heads yet and you just want to play with it, make sure you have something in there so you can see the head moving. So you can go into your states again. And you can add a state for this, and we'll call it so the state again for color wheel, you can tell it, okay, I want states to be red. You want to label all the colors on your wheel. So we'll just do green, blue. So when you're going through your heads, you would select your color because it's going to be controlling your color wheel. When you're setting up your color wheel, go through and find out what ranges your colors are in. So when you're playing with your DMX, setting everything up, finding out what all the channels do. When you're cycling, since color wheel would be channel 1, when you're cycling through these channels, you can look at what you have your DMX2. So we'll say this one's 10, and I'll show you real quick what I'm talking about. So when you're on your DMX effect and you have so when you're on your DMX effect here, your color wheels, so you would go through and find what channels, channel number your colors start at. So it'll be 0 to 255. To figure out which position each one's at, it'll be in a range, and you'll want to take the number that you find that's near the middle of that range. So in your layout, you find that is 10 was the best set for that. So blue, you just tell it you want it to be a color. On your custom color in blue, say it was 100 was dead center. And same with your green. So green was 200. Most colors will be blacks and grays because of where they fall in those numbers, which that doesn't matter because the way we're going to be sequencing it, we're going to make a timing track that just has our colors in there. So there's not really a whole lot you can see in xLights for this, unfortunately. But if you have your head moved hooked up and you're outputting to lights, you could go through and change this to your state. And say you want it to be red. So if you drill into your head, wife needs a different computer. Okay, red's a little too dark. Let's try. You can see. All right, see how channel 1, our color channel, now has the same hue that was set up for our states. So it knows that you'll see the color as you put your states in there, and that's what it's going to be doing. As for groups are extremely easy. We'll hit groups real quick, and then we'll take a break before we roll the DMX2. So in your layout, you would create a group, call it heads. And with heads, we'll put both of these in there. So if you're going to be running multiple heads in a straight line, up here where it says minimal grid for your default layout model, you would change that to single line. If you're going to be running heads, say you had 4 and you had 1 here, here, 1 here, and here in a grid form, you would put it to grid, to minimal grid. It just tells xLights makes stuff work a lot better. So if you're running effects back and forth, it So since we have two heads, we're going to do a single line because they're in line with each other. Even if you had a head here and then one down here, if you only have two between the heads, it'd be a single line to those heads. So if you go into your group and you edit display elements, move our heads over here. This is where it gets tricky. If you have heads that are not the exact same, so say you have two different styles of heads that have different channels for control, do not put them in the same group. If the pan and the tilt are on the same channel, you can put them in the same group. So only group heads together that are going to be the same, which I did a don't do that. So we're going to take this guy out. I'm just going to create another one here. Copy, paste. To make a secondary head, just control paste. And I know they're on top of each other right now. So take that out of preview. So we have these two heads. They're stacked on top of each other because wife's computer's not working well today. And we'll put them in a group. So if I wanted these to do the exact same thing, like with the AB, I wanted them to have each one completely set up and hit it. I could use the vert preset that we had made earlier. Drop the AB down here. Okay. And you want to check anytime something's not doing what you want it to do. You want to look at your render style. So doing heads, you want to do it per model per preview when you're running in a group. So now when you're playing back, see how the heads had moved. And where all this comes in handy at. If you have preset areas, so if you want to have a cross pattern, you can set them up with presets. Same with if at specific spots, you can set those up and use the status in order to do that. Any questions? I'm sure we have quite a few.
Can we do the raffle quick? I want to be respectful of time if people want to leave or whatever. And
Yep.
so.
And for lasers is a lot shorter.
Okay, I just want to, we got a prize for the last hour. I want to just make sure we give that out and the person's still here, and then we can reset and have a prize for the next hour or so. I basically, you have to be present to win. So once I announce your name, if you can just like raise your hand or say something so I can make sure you're here. So, okay. The prize is a $25 gift certificate to Wally's Lights and 100 pixels. So if you get it, please thank the please thank Wally's Lights for that. So the winner is number 1684, Donnie Lloyd. Is he present or did he leave? Oh, okay, he's in here. So well, we got your information through the registration, so you'll be contacted about that hopefully in the next couple of days. So now I'll just start taking attendance again for the second prize, which is a 20% coupon from Wizard of Wires. So we'll take attendance a couple times throughout this next hour or so, or whenever David's done, and then we'll give out that prize as well. So yeah, thanks, David. Keep going ready.
Any questions on moving heads before we start rolling into lasers? Okay. All right. I'm David Spalding. Been doing light shows since 2005. I've got 15 years experience, started with LOR, switched to xLights. Been playing with DMX items lately, and we're going to be covering lasers today. We're going to cover terminology, things to consider. If you're in here for the floodlight class, you're going to see several things that are similar in this presentation, but we're going to try to gear more towards lasers. The types of lasers, the legality of them in the US, different setups. So we'll blaze through the controllers real quick, cover how I set them up in xLights. Then sequencing made easy, DMX using state effects to get the lasers set up so they're a lot easier to use. Then you can also sequence those on the group level as well. So ILDA, it's the International Laser Display Association. So ILDA, some laserists had gotten together and decided that they needed to get a organization to help with requirements and laws and all that. So ILD is not, they're just there for the laserists, for education and to help people get into the hobby. Blanking is the capability of a show laser system to rapidly turn on and off. The laser within the display invisible lines, graphics, and animations. When drawing text, the laser system needs to be needs the ability of blinking to omit the empty spots between the characters. Audience scanning, mimicry projection of visible lasers, lights into the crowd of spectators. It is used for special effects like laser tunnels and to visually integrate the spectators into the show. Dependent on the respective country, audience scanning is handled very differently. Because of security and safety concerns, this form of beam show is considered critically in the United States. You do have to have approval. We'll get more into that a little bit later. Laserists, they design, create, and control a laser show. FDA, Food and Drug Administration, they're the ones who are in charge of laser use in the United States. Hydroshielding. Hydroshields are projection surfaces made of water used to make laser graphics and effects visible. They use hydroshielding. KPPS is kilo points per second. It describes the speed of a show laser scanning system that shows how many thousands of laser points per second can be displayed on the wall or other suitable surfaces. Tilt is your vertical rotation. And then pan is going to be your horizontal rotation. Maximum permissible exposure, MPE, is the highest laser power that is considered safe for the eye. This value usually ranges in the allowed level for laser class 2. Safety zone. Safety zones are areas where the beam intensity brightness is adjusted to such a low value that even the projection of the laser beam into the audience will not be as dangerous, also known as audio scanning. Digital to analog converters, a DAC. It's a hardware device that is able to convert computer-generated laser images, serial signal into a ILDA laser, control signals and parallel signal. Typically, USB and Ethernet controllers are used as digital to analog converters. Controlled show laser display, you'll need another digital to analog converter. Watt and measures of power a laser projector provides. Higher the watts, the brighter the laser beam in general. But it depends also on other things like divergence and the beam diameter. So when you want to go into lasers, depending on what class of laser you have, you may have to get a variance, which is provided through the FDA. You have to register with the FDA. The variance is essentially a license or permit through the FDA for use of lasers of 0.5 watts, class 3B laser or higher. Divergence is the expansions of laser beam over a long distance. The FAA is the Federal Aviation Administration. Just like in moving heads, DMX is awesome. Always look at allowance, weather, electricity, surroundings, output, mounting, and effects. Allowance, your budget, name brand versus generic. We'll cover a little bit about getting the Chinese generic ones a little bit further in here, why that may not be a great idea. Weather, you know if it's going to be hot or cold, rain or snow, wind or calm, wet or dry. With lasers, if you want to see the beams, you have to have haze. There's no way around it. If you want to laze, you have to haze, is how I've heard several people put it before. If you're around laserists or talk to laserists, you will hear them say that a lot. If you want to laze, you have to haze. Electricity. So this is just a standard DJ laser. This isn't an outputting one. That's where this picture originally came from. So you need to figure out how you're going to get your power to to your lasers, if they're going to be linkable, non-linkable, and how they're going to connect. Surroundings. Lasers, it is very, very, very important you know your surroundings. You need to know your proximity to neighbors. You need to know where people are going to have foot following local laws. If you're near airports, even if you're not in a flight path, if you're pointing do not point your lasers up without FAA approval. So if you haze over a laser, it goes forever. So you could actually be hitting aircraft and blinding pilots. So do not point your lasers up without FAA approval. Output. How are you going to be outputting the device? Are you going to be out, since this is DMX, we're going to cover DMX. I'll talk a little bit about ArtNet, not a whole lot. Are you going to be using DMX controller or the SW82811 converters? Cables, are you going to be using store-bought or DIY? If you're going to be doing the DMX side of them, DIY is fine. We'll cover a cable that you definitely will want to use store-bought depending on what laser you're using. Device maximum effect outputs. You want to know everything that laser can do before you start using it outside. Then if you're going to be running DMX to make it easier to troubleshoot. So with mounting, you want to look at the weight as well. Just like before, roofs will only hold 20 pounds sustained is the average in the United States. So if you're going to mount it to your roof, make sure that you know what your roof is rated at, what the weight of your lasers are going to be. If your enclosures are not made for lasers, they can produce very undesirable outcomes. So a laser is a laser, just you could cause damage, the light could refract differently. This is a moving head enclosure. If you put a laser in this, your laser may refract, not do exactly what you want to do. If you're going to be using outside and not bringing them in and just leaving them mounted all the time, I would recommend getting an outdoor laser. If you're going to put them on the ground or if you're going to mount them to truss systems, just like before, you need to make sure you have all the hardware you're going to need to be able to mount your laser where you're going to be putting it. Things to consider with the effects, you want to look at if it's going to be accents or focal points, single color RGB animation, if you're going to be using it for as a laser projector, which will be more of your animation or the lasers that you can write with, or if you want to, if you're just looking for an effect for random spots like this. This is a picture from a Home Depot laser projector, the little cheap $30 ones that are on a stake, stick it in the ground, it's got a diffuser on it, projects this. You can incorporate those as well, or you can get a DMX laser that you can change different effects. And you want to know the effect capabilities of your DMX laser device. So you want to know if it'll do like vertical lines, circle patterns, circle rolls. You want to know what's all preloaded on them. With a more expensive laser, you can use software and create your own effects with them. Types of lasers. So the most common types that are used for our lighting world are the only ones I'm going to really be talking about. A few people I know are using the class 4s, but so the class 3R is a lower power, having less than 5 milliwatts of power in the visible region as measured by the manufacturer. This exact wording is crucial. Scattered laser effects can have greater than 5 milliwatts of power, but over a wide space so that they are measured under that at a given point. So you could have a higher powered the laser coming out without having scattered effects. can be a higher power. Once it hits the filters and scatters, it'll actually be lowering that down to where it's under the 5 milliwatt. Class 3B and Class 4 lasers, on the other hand, they can be over 5 milliwatts or 0.5 watts for those of you who are following along at home, and require a variance be registered for use. Laws and regulations may vary from state to state. Make sure you're checking with your local government. For those of you overseas, make sure you're checking with your local government and your country's government on what your regulations are for lasers. So with variance, you've heard me mention variance quite a bit. It is handled all by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. The variance has to be specific to the usage of the lasers, so to the use of the show. So you can't have a variance, take it somewhere else and set up and expect to run without filing another variance for that location. They need to be updated yearly, and you have to report the number of shows per year. China bought lasers may not be compliant with variance. It's because they're not as regulated. So the China ones are usually going to be your ones off of eBay and Amazon. Variance continued. Using a laser with variance. So when you're looking at setting up your variance, here's several of the things that you'll be looking at. You need to keep the laser 3 meters above any surface that an audience member may stand or on and away from any mirrors or windows. You need to make sure you terminate your beam. You need to make an endpoint. Any lasers used outdoors. And a termination point is not a tree. If you're pointing your laser at a tree, you're using it as a termination point, so it'll draw on it. If that beam goes through the leaves, it continues going and hits an airplane. You've got some big problems. They may require post-warning signage, depending on what type of laser you're using. Anything that requires variance, most of the times they'll have you providing 2 methods of disabling the laser. And you have to have an operator or safety watch with eyes on the laser display at all times, ready to disable the laser if something goes wrong. This isn't the complete list of what you will need to do, but it should give you an idea of what may be required that needs to be included in the variance. So controllers, if you're going to be outputting DMX on the Falcons, don't use port 1, try to use port 2 or 3 for your DMX outputs. And Colt, you've also got DMX on those as well. The Pixel 2 things, like stated in the last class, you can put a Pixel 2 things midstream, so you can have Pixel, and then the Pixel 2 things AC board will eat up 3 channels of pixel data. And then on the DMX out, you'll have 512 channels you can still use, but it'll line up channel 16, which would be red on the following pixel, is going to be channel 1 on your DMX. 17 is going to be channel 2 on your DMX, and 3 is going to be 18, so on and so forth. So if you're going to have if you're going to use one of the Pixel 2 things, which is the only WS2811 2 DMX converter that I have seen on the market, if you're going to be putting pixels out, you need to find out what the end channel of that pixel is going to be, and then your DMX will continue on. So if you're only going to run 1 pixel after your Pixel 2 AC board, your starting channel on your DMX, there'll be 1, 2, 3. So these three channels on 512 are 8 up, so it would be channel 4 That way you don't get any overlap when you're programming your DMX device address. Cabling. So just like before, the DMX side of it, you can use waterproof XLRs, you can use standard XLRs. To an XLR, so you can use an RJ45 to XLR adapter that you can either DIY that part, or you can order one already pre-made. With some of the lasers out there, they've got an ILDA in and out, which that's not the proper term for it. It's actually a DB25. You'll hear people mentioning, oh, I've got ILDA cables. Well, they're talking about a DB25 in and out on the laser, and then they're outputting to the laser using a DB25. So DIY cabling for CAT and FX. So you've got, this is the B standard. So you'll have your data positive, data negative, and your ground, which number one is striped, solid. Then you can connect to either two of these for your ground. There is different ones out there if you're using 5-pin DMX. Most of the people in the hobby have been seen many people getting any 5-pin DMX items. So laser projector hardware that you would need. So if you're going to get a customizable laser where you can set up your own graphics, you'll need software. Panglion is the most widely used. To go from your PC to Panglion, you'll need a converter. So running from your PC to the laser, you'll need a converter, or if you're wanting to preload, you would use an FB4 with DMX control. You save the cues on the SD card. You can trigger them with xLights by using DMX values. Usually the FB4s come in 15 or 39 channels, and they can also support ArcNet, which is something that's fairly new. You can output ArcNet from xLights to or FPP to control it. We're going to cover the DMX side of it. Just thought that was something you guys might find interesting on it. So normally you would have your DMX coming in. It would go to your FB4. Then on the other side of your FB4, you would have your cable out for your DB25 to go to your laser. Here's a few resources that are extremely helpful before we get into the xLights side of it. So laserworld.com, ilda.com, FDA.gov, the Laser Light Show. This is the exact breakout of the link. You can go to FDA.gov and search for laser light shows, or you can just Google FDA laser light shows or FDA laser. It'll bring you to this link. And this is where you would also go in order to if you're looking at buying lasers that are made for the US, the easiest company to work with is xlaser.com. If you purchase from them, they will help you get your variants. They will help you figure out everything you need, because trying to file for a variance through FDA is kind of confusing, and they are a great help. All right, so with xLights, to set up lasers in your xLights, get rid of some of this stuff. Moving heads is the best thing to use because it gives you the multiple channels. So the model that I have used just playing around with non-variants, just straight DMX, is moving heads. So the way you would set these up, I'll just start fresh. Totally your preference. I just use the standard moving head. So just a standard generic laser that you can buy that's DJ rated, non-variance required, would be a 6-channel laser. Usually they're just reading. The one that I played with had rainbow color. Once you start getting into the bigger lasers that are more expensive, you'll see that there's a lot of different ways to set those up. So setting up just a regular old laser, you just tell, you don't worry about setting a pan, tilt, rotation, tilt, any of that, because xLights will not show you what the laser is doing. Because lasers don't have a complete full moving head. So the way that I do these is I use state. So we'll actually label some channels first. So you go down to strand node name. And then we're going to, like the generic one, channel 1 for the one I've played with is mode. And the modes consist of static, dynamic, sound, or auto, depending on what the value, DMX value that's being put to it is. 2 is patterns, and every laser is going to be different. I can't just give you a generic of this is what they're always going to be. So you need to know specifically what each one of yours is doing. And that, like, there's 26 static patterns, 26 dynamic patterns, and you can cycle through them, figure out which each pattern is. Your x-axis, because the laser does move back and forth in the window slightly. So you can move a circle or something across the screen. Channel 4, we'll say, is the y-axis, which is going to be your vertical. Channel 5 is your scanning speed, so how fast the laser is scanning. And then when you are programming lasers, sequencing is easier to have the laser on and see what what it's actually doing while you're sequencing. And then number 6 is going to be your pattern speed. So how fast it's running. After you have your channels labeled, you can actually start setting up some of your states. So if you know you have preset states that you want to use for your lasers. So you'll always force custom colors. So like, I want to set mine up for a do a dynamic. So number 1 will be our mode for it. So we'll call it circ R for circle rule. You gotta tell it which node you're going to be doing. We're going to set our mode for it. Click, go to your colors. So let's say the dynamic was 100 and 149. So you can pick a number between 100 and 149. So let's just do 110. Okay. Now I want to do the preset circle roll. It's going to be my patterns. And I want it to be a dynamic pattern of circle roll, which on that laser was a value of 25 through 29, depending on how I wanted the circle to look. So we'll say it was 29 because I really like the way that looked. And the x-axis, we can move it around, y-axis, but I like that. The scanning speed, I wanted it to go faster. So we're going to make another circle R, and we'll make this one the scanning speed because I found a scan speed I really liked. And that one was 250 on that laser. 255 would be the slowest, 0 would be the fastest, and I like the way 100 looked. Change all 3 color hues to 100. Okay. When you go to your sequencer, I'm just going to create a new one here. That way I don't have any interference from the old ones. So the DMX moving head is going to be our laser. So I'm going to change this to laser. So it's less confusing. All right, so I wanted to use the state effects. So say a 10 go to that preset circle roll that I had defined that I wanted it to do. So either change the name of your new timing track. I always add a timing track. Click OK, and we're going to call it preset. So you'll grab your state effect, drag it down here. We want it to be on the laser. That's awesome. We want it to be on the laser presets. Starting right at 10 minutes is where we want it, so we'll hit T for a preset, and we want it to stop at 20 seconds, so we'll double click and we just type in what you wanted it to do, which was circle R for circle roll. So if you drill in to your laser here, and then save it. That's why. Yep, I misspelled. Spelling is key. See how the colors are showing up now? So it's going to control those channels and put them at those intervals. You can also use the DMX effect and go through, and if you want your lasers just going, if you want to set a Our computer's slow at catching up here. So if you want to physically go through and set numbers and you want it to do a specific thing, you can, or you can also sequence using, if you want to fly through patterns, you can use value curves. You can create your own custom value curves. You can change them however you want it to work and control each layer like that. It's not letting. So if you have a laser that you had loaded with software, try to get this thing going. To where you say you loaded up your laser, your FB4 with all your preset stuff that you had loaded from your Pangolin software, preload them, set the DMX values. You can do those also by using a moving head. So the Pangolin will you have 15 through 29 channels. So you would define everything in Pangolin on, and then upload it to your FB4. So with the, if you're going to do that, you just remember where those presets are, and then you can set it up where your moving head is representing your Pangolin on FB4. So instead of just a 6-channel laser, you can max this thing out to match your Pangolin. And then you would just set up your states for each one of those. So say we had a state in here that with the Pangolin on, that I want it to be a horse. So I had created a horse in software. I uploaded it to F4. And notice how now it's telling me that it's nodes. So you would, to make it easier on you, you would create your Pangolin chart and then upload it to it. So if, say, now I want it to be the horse, then I set the horse up to be at value 25. So each one gets set to 25. When you go to your sensor for your state effect, change this back to state. So for the state effect, say I've got the Pangolin set up, and I want it to go from that arc earlier, and I want it to go into a horse that I had loaded Pangolin. So you just type in what that preset state that you labeled under your laser was going to be of force, and then it'll automatically pull that in and put everything up that you're needing for. Any questions from DMX2? Are there any questions from?
Yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask them to David.
Hey, David, can you go over again how you interface the pangolin system with xLights?
So with the pangolin, the hardware that you would need, you would need you can get a laser that either has an FB4. You would run your dongle from your pangolin to your FB4, and you can preload some styles of the FB4. There's some where you would have to have a DMX input to the computer. The easiest way to have these show up is to preload your laser. Preload everything for your laser, get an FB4 that you can load everything to, or get a laser that has it mounted on it that you can set all your value curves. So you would use, going into your Pangolin, you have your DMX, your xLights controller, or however you're going to drive DMX to the laser system to trigger the cues in the FB4. So the FB4 would then talk over your DB25 and go into your laser to drive the laser. If you have multiple lasers and you have in and outs chained together, it's going to drive, depending on which version of Pangolin you get, which version of the FB4. I always recommend having a separate one for every laser. That way the lasers don't override each other and just copy.
Okay. So if you have just a single laser, can you have xLights control movement of the laser, left, right, up, and down?
Yep. Usually with the lasers, if you are you going to be using like a DJ style, or are you using one that uses the DB25 connector?
The DB25.
Okay. So in Pangolin, you would go in and set up what you are wanting it to do. I haven't played much with just driving a DB25 direct from DMX. It's always been scenes that you set up in Pangolin and then drive out that way. So everything that it's always just been presets from what I've seen from using Pangolin, because I use mostly the DJ style lasers. There is an X Essentials from last year that does cover Pangolin a lot more than what I got into on today. And he did an amazing job. He's I think his name was Garrett, episode 22, I believe, of X Essentials 2019.
Episode 23?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay. So if you wanted to link several images together in the pangolin system, and you're going to be driving that with xLights, you would just put in, like, after you had your horse, and then if you wanted a monkey and you wanted a man, they would be underneath each of those in your setup.
You would go in and just set what the preset DMX values were to trigger those in the laser, or you can use a DMX effect and plug each one of those values in. It's a lot easier to set everything up in your states and tell it, well, this is where it's going to trigger. So like say you wanted a monkey as well.
Yeah.
Yep. And you have your pangolin set to where that one was on channel 12. And your value, say you set it up for value 25, kicks it in. You would just change all of your color hues. That way we know we're putting out a straight value of 25 to it. And then when you go back to your sequencer, like say you wanted it to do a horse, you wanted to cycle back and forth between a horse and a monkey, you can put in here horse, comma, monkey, and it'll cycle back and forth if you change from gradient to allocate, I'm sorry, not gradient, change your mode rate, and then it'll flip back and forth between these.
So you change mode to iterate?
Yep, that's if you wanted it to just constantly flip back and forth, or you want it to run a little bit and then change over without having to put multiple timing marks and put everything in here. So anything that you put up here in your timeline between these marks, so if I had anything that you do up here, if you separate them with a comma, like if you have heads in here, you can tell it, I want a red head, I want shutter open, whatever you have, all your presets. You can have all your DMX heads, all your lasers, everything set to this preset, and then that specific model will only grab the data that applies to those presets. So if you, with red, if your laser's not set up to have the keyword RED, only your head, your moving heads, if you set those up to have a red, it'll grab that information and change that preset on that device only. So using the state effects just makes sequencing so much easier, especially if you're going to be flying through several different presets that you like to have. I use it more for, this is what I want it to do, because I found something that looked really cool. Well, instead of having to sequence each of those with the DMX effect, it's so much easier to say, okay, I want it to go from this time to this time, type it in, and be good.
Gotcha.
So we're kind of getting close on time here, so I'd like to do the raffle, and then we'll get ready for the next presentation at 7. So thanks, David, for everything. If you can stop share, I can share, and then
Yep.
once we do the raffle, I want to verify the person's here. If not, we'll rerun it. So